Hey, Rolling Out family. Today we are honored to welcome Veronica Harrison to this edition of Meet the Author. Veronica is an award-winning publicist and writer whose work consistently amplifies narratives that often go unheard. Her 2021 book, Hood Healing, offers an unflinching look at intergenerational trauma, public policy, and a lived experience of growing up on Chicago's West Side. On May 18th, Veronica brought her powerful message behind the walls of Danville Correctional Center, a medium security prison where she engaged directly with male inmates, sharing her story and distributing copies of her book. This visit is historic. Veronica is the first author invited since 200 books were removed from the facility in 2019 for being racially charged. These books, many focused on Black issues and policies, and were never replaced. Her return as an author represents both for restoration of voice and a reclamation of space. Veronica Harrison, welcome to Meet the Author. How are you?
Thank you so much, Eddie. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for the shout out. I appreciate this coverage.
Of course, of course. Let's just jump right into it. What inspired the writing of Hood Healing, and how did your own upbringing shape the narrative?
Thank you so much for that question, Eddie. You know, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, and it is always and has always and continues to be a part of my life. I am in a situation now where I'm raising my own children, but in my upbringing in the city, I saw and learned so much at a very, very young age. I realized that stories were trapped inside of Black people that we weren't telling, that we could not tell. So I'm excited to be a journalist telling those stories right now.
Indeed. So, how would you describe the core message of the book?
Hood healing is really about intergenerational trauma, how we are living with trauma inside of us since our own people, Black African people, were enslaved 300 years ago. How does this impact what's happening on the streets right now? Why are we so angry? Why is our music so euphoric? Why don't we know the good foods to eat to heal and nourish us? All of these things were taken away when our people were brought over here on those slave ships. We don't realize that the residuals of the slavery is still inside of us. So it's
Mhm.
about the passing on of trauma. And what I realized was happening to me through my own parents, and what I realized as a parent I was doing to my children. So putting an understanding around intergenerational trauma and how we can heal from that. That's the basis of the book.
So, how do Chicago public policies show up in your book, and what do you hope readers take away from those connections?
Chicago public policy has failed us. As Black people, we know, and it is not a secret, that in Austin on the west side and in Inglewood on the south side, there are food deserts. There are schools that are uninhabitable that we have children in, schools that have been closed down. As a journalist, I've written about all of this. I've covered the narrative of Black people throughout the city, how reporters come into our city and tell us our own stories. I said that wasn't going to happen anymore, Eddie. I was going to tell my own story. So I decided that all of these public policy issues needed to be called out. But in addition to calling them out, in chapter 5 of Hood Healing, Eddie, I offer suggestions. What can we do as a community, as a society, as a culture to bring about some healing in our homes that will then go into our communities? I'm calling them out. I'm not afraid to call out the city of Chicago. I'm not afraid to call out the politics. We need healing in these communities, and we cannot do that under the current public policies.
I just came back from a trip to Salt Lake City, Utah, and I kind of had a predis. I kind of had an idea of what I thought Salt Lake was. I was right, and I was kind of right and wrong just because of there's a specific tone. Of course, you think of maybe a little bit right leaning and some religious undertones and those type of things. However, one of the things that I saw was how beautiful the city was and how peaceful how peaceful the city is. And it made me think to something that you just said, like in terms of that kind of peace missing from a lot
Oh,
of our
yeah.
major cities, right?
Mhm.
And what can we do to get back to that peace? Why
Mhm.
is addressing the intergenerational trauma so important to getting back there?
Because Eddie, I know it sounds so cliche, but it starts in our homes. It really, really does. We want to continue to blame politics and policy, but Hood Healing tells my story of what happened in my home. how that intergenerational trauma came from my dad having an addiction, my mom being a teenage mom and being kicked out of her house. All of these things inside of my home, despite a college degree, despite being an honor roll student, has had and continues to have an intense impact on me. So
Hmm.
it doesn't matter how you try to escape it, it has to be dealt with. And when we're talking about the book and we're talking about the truth, we've grown up in families, Eddie. I know you and I can relate with Black mamas or Black daddies. Don't tell people what's going on outside of my house. We
Right.
don't do that. And because we keep these intergenerational traumas secret, they're forever trapped inside of us. And then they play out in our relationships, at our jobs, through our careers. We start realizing we're battling anger issues, mental health, things that have went undiagnosed because we've been keeping secrets. So
Right.
it's a way to sound the alarm and talk about it, but also be about it. Because, like I mentioned to you, I was on my high horse chapters 1 through 4, but chapter 5, I give you some solutions, and it's in the book.
Right. So, what did it mean for you to bring hood healing into Danville Correctional Center?
Wow. Thank you for asking. The very first reporter for me to visit with since the actual visit this past Sunday. It was a powerful experience. I'm talking grown men older than me, younger men younger than me, who are in there for life or for a very long time. But some of them are brilliant minds. And my entire point of hood healing was creating some empathy around trauma, creating an understanding that it's our common thread. One thing I told those gentlemen, I brought my book in there, 200 books were removed from Danville facility in 2019. NPR did a heavy lift reporting on this, so shout out to NPR. But no one else mentioned the story after that. It went completely silent. And now we're wondering, what are those inmates in there reading? When I got there, Eddie, they had copies that they have Xerox of Hood Healing. I felt completely honored. They are thirsty to learn, thirsty to know what's going on out here in the streets. They are thirsty for that. And so I told them about the 200 books being banned. And then they told me, well, we've been building programs. They've got a game of life on the wall where they're talking about financial management. These inmates, some that got in there 20 plus years ago, as teenagers, are building curricula, scholar curricula that can be sold to schools, to be quite frankly honest with you, and
Mm.
educating themselves within, despite what public policies are telling them, despite who society's telling them who they are. One thing I said to all of them, it was 100 different men, 2 separate groups. I spoke to over 200 inmates on Sunday. One thing I said to them at the very beginning of each talk was I wanted to see their eyes. One thing that my mother said about holding me as a baby and when I held my babies is that you'll never forget the eyes. Many of them have been on death row. I was literally in interview with one of the initial original John Birch torture victims who have been on death row twice. You're talking people who are full of stories and now imprisoned and can't get them out. They
Mhm.
can't get the stories out. Now they can't read. I told them I wanted to see their eyes because that's who they were. The same people, Eddie, that their mama saw on the
Mm.
day of birth. And if we create that type of empathy, that type of healing inside of the prison, if we create that type of message in society, we can heal one another in and out, no matter what color of your skin, no matter where you're from. And that's my goal as an author and as a journalist with Hood Healing.
Speaking to that healing, how do you see literature playing a role in healing and rehabilitation within these incarcerated communities?
Awesome question. I heard about the banning of I Knew Why the Cage Birds Sing by Maya Angelou and Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn because they use the N word. And when you think about some of these stories and books that we are looking to ban and some that are still on the shelf, those are stories that matter, just like Hood Healing. And I'll tell you why. One thing I'll never forget is learning about the slavery, Atlantic slave trade, and anti Black practices happening across this country, civil rights laws, and Jim Crow. And thinking to myself, they erased our documentation. Now, if you get a people, a culture out of their environment, you take their language, you break up their families, you erase their documentation, you can make it whatever you want. You can make America great, can't you? Because what you can say is, I own that narrative, they don't. Well, Eddie, I'm here to own the narrative for the voiceless. I've been telling people lately, V stands for voiceless. because I'm here for the voiceless. Because when we say that we're taking away a culture's documentation, we say that we're taking their history and we're shaping their futures, not them. And I won't allow that to happen. So the lack of documentation is why we need those books. It's why we need literature. Nina Simone said, and it's one of my favorite quotes, if you are a creator, if you are an artist, it is your responsibility to reflect the times. I am looking to reflect the times with Hood Healing to let people know that during COVID, we stood. During Jim Crow, we stood. During the MLK riots in '68, we stood. And if we don't write that down, people will tell us we weren't standing.
Yeah. As a publicist and author, how do you balance advocacy, storytelling, and media work?
I'm all over the place. I like to tell people that the motherhood title is the one that everybody forget. Go on, put that up there because that should be the top of the resume. Because I run my home and my children full time. And to be honest with you, that's the real chore and job, but the blessing. But when you're talking about juggling PR and you're talking about juggling journalism, I put on separate hats, separate crowns, I should say. PR work means that I am amplifying voices of small and large businesses across the city. Journalism and communications means I'm pushing those messages out. Really, they work hand in hand, but I have clientele all over the city and beyond that are seeking justice in their narrative. So as I am writing just narratives, I am promoting that through my clientele. So it's a win-win.
Yes, yes. Were there any stories that you heard during your visit to Danville that stuck with you that you want to share?
There was a gentleman in there. He was an older gentleman, about in his late 40s. Told me he had a son out there. His son was doing everything, going to school, getting good grades, coming home. His mama was reporting back he was doing well at home. His son got killed when he was in there. Since he's been in there, it's very fresh, not even a month. The gentleman cried on me like a newborn baby about his son. They want people to let them know that they are in there with stories. And if no one goes, and if no one visits, and if no one shares those stories, their stories are entrapped just like they're entrapped. I keep thinking about that gentleman and thinking about the murder of my own brother, Daryl Harrison Jr., shot in an alley 10 times on the west side, not too far from where we grew up. I think about the fact that I'm able to share that with you today, Eddie. That man inside that prison in Danville can't share that story. Think about the grief, not being able to let it go. It's compounded with the grief of our ancestors. And so that stuck with me because I thought about how is he sleeping at night? How is he eating, drinking, breathing, knowing that he lost a child, that he cannot grieve with his family, that he is grieving inside of prison. It stuck with me, and I've been thinking about him ever since.
Yes, yes. So, what do you want media outlets, policymakers, and community members to understand about this visit that you just made and your book?
Make noise. Make noise. Get loud. If we can get loud about Diddy and Cassie, if we can continue to be loud about Trump's atrocious bills, we can be loud about the preservation of our history as it relates to our healing. Don't let healing become a buzzword. Don't let healing become a word that you're using in your articles, you're using on your podcast, and you're using to get $1. Actually, be it and message it out to the public to live in it. Because this culture will fail if we don't continue to communicate effectively. That is one reason I launched my PR business, because giving real and just narratives is something we're missing in this culture. We give all the wrong attention to all the wrong things. We are failing as Black media and Black press if we don't uplift the people who don't have voices. We are failing as Black media and Black press if we don't do what you and I are doing, Eddie, sharing each other's stories, giving each other an outlet to share stories. And if we continue to highlight what's unimportant, everything important will fall by the wayside.
Yeah. So, how can people learn more about you? Where can they find your book? Let them know.
Absolutely. VL Harrison everywhere. I always tell people I'm at home, but I'm everywhere out here in these streets at the same time. And I don't know how I do it. But find me on Facebook, Veronica Harrison V. Find me on Instagram at VL Harrison. I'm on Twitter sometimes as VL Harrison, but the book is available on Amazon all day long. Hood Healing, 1999. I made it pricing affordable and I made it digestible so that my people can get the history and the narrative that they read. And follow me online at vlharrison.com.
Veronica, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Eddie, thank you so much for having me. Shout out, Rolling Out. I've been a fan for years. I'm excited.
Yes, yes, yes. Rolling Out family. Veronica's work is a reminder that storytelling can be a form of resistance
Oh,
and
yeah.
that healing begins with truth telling. Through Hood Healing, she not only shares her journey, but also opens a path for others to reclaim theirs. This is your man, Precise. And as I always say, stay focused, positive, and productive. Peace.